Hi, my name is Gerard Barron, and I am the CEO of the Metals Company. And I'm joined today by Anthony O'Sullivan, who's our Chief Development Officer. So the Metals Company are all about opening up a new supply of battery materials. In fact, and we're very focused on polymetallic nodules. And you can see I'm holding one in my hand. They form in the deep ocean. They sit in the abyssal zone. And they form by precipitating the metals that are in solution in the seawater or in the sediment upon which they sit. And we're focused on an area just off the coast of Mexico, well, about 1,100 nautical miles off the coast of Mexico, known as the Clarion Clipperton Zone, or CCZ, where these nodules form in great abundance with very high grades of nickel, copper, cobalt, and manganese. And in fact, if you put the copper, cobalt, and manganese into nickel equivalents, it's well over 3%. So very high grade. And on just two of our license areas, we've identified about 1.6 billion tons of polymetallic nodules. And we're excited to share more of the story with you today.
Gerard, thank you very much for that introduction. Deep sea mining, polymetallic nodules. I interview quite a lot of companies, and this is a new venture for me. I did years ago meet the offshore diamond producers, but Anthony, why don't you jump on and give us a brief introduction to your background and how you came to be the development and technical officer for a deep sea mining company?
Yeah, thanks, Merlin. I'm a geologist by training. I have more than 30 years experience in the minerals industry. About 15 years of that with BHP. I was in their exploration leadership team, the global exploration leadership team, and responsible for their iron ore, coal, bauxite and base metal exploration programs. When I left BHP, I joined a company called Nautilus, which pioneered a lot of subsea development in PNG, undertook a number of world firsts and started the development of the Sawara 1 deposit. I joined the DeepGreen, now the metals company, in 2017, and have been responsible for all elements of the project development, from resource evaluation, environmental baseline data collection, permitting, the offshore engineering, and our process development.
Wonderful, thanks you. My goodness, there's so much to unpack there. But before we get onto the permitting and the environmental side of things, can you just talk me through how it works? So that the modules are at the seafloor. First of all, about the resource estimation. How do you know about the grade of these samples? How do you get a kind of representative grade? How do you do a resource estimate on that?
Well, if we go to, I think, around about slide 8, Gerard, or slide 7, that just has some of the resource summary, you can show where the resource is.
And this has been performed by taking samples kind of at specific frequency across a nodule field.
Yeah, and so Gerard, if we just go to the previous slide, I think that's the useful one that actually just shows you what the sea floor looks like. This is a video of a transect taken by an underwater autonomous vehicle, which you'll see a picture of a bit later. Just taking photography of the sea floor. All the little black things you can see there are nodules. The white bits are just some sand volcanoes pushed up by worms. And you can see that there's a continuous pavement of these nodules, which have an average grade of 1.3% nickel, 1.1% copper, 0.2% cobalt, and 29.5% manganese. The way we evaluate the resource, and it has very high confidence because you can actually see it. It's essentially a 2D resource. Gerard, if you go to the picture about 2 or 3 down, that shows the AUV and the launcher. Yeah, this one. So this is how we evaluate the resource. We're using these assets. The boat in the top left corner is the Maersk launcher, a vessel that we used to support, or we did use to support all our offshore work. But basically the things that we need to know to define the resource are, we need to know the abundance of the nodules on the seafloor, and we need to know the metal contents of the nodules on the seafloor. And with those two pieces of knowledge, we can put the resource together.
And by abundance, is there a depth component to this? Is this one layer across? Is it one nodule thick, or are these a kind of accumulate?
They're largely all at the surface, and particularly in the Nori D area where we've focused, the nodules are there at the surface, and they know what you see is what you get. So the way we can work out the abundance is by deploying box cores, which you can see two examples of on the top right there. It's basically a device that lowers down on a wire to the seafloor, punch it into the seafloor, and when you pick it up, a shovel comes in underneath, a lid goes on the top. So it's like cutting a piece of turf from the seafloor. We bring that up to the surface. We know the area of the box core, and in this case, it's 0.75 meters squared. We weigh the nodules, so we know the mass of nodules per unit area. And then we take a sample of the nodules and assay them for the key metals. One of the remarkable things about this resource is its consistency. When you look at the statistics for the chemistry of the nodules, the range on the variograms is of the order of 20 kilometres. So if you take a sample of the order of 7 to 10 kilometres from each other, you get an accurate or a reasonable estimate of the chemistry of the nodules. The range on the variogram for abundance, a little bit more variable, but that's about 10 kilometres. So sampling that on a 3 kilometre spacing gets you to measured resource status. So the approach we use is we've been box coring depending upon the variance at sort of 10 to 7 kilometre spacing, and that provides the estimate of the chemistry. And then using the AUV, which you can see that orange torpedo-shaped body, that's a remote, basically a subsea drone that you can provide a mission to. It has a duration of the current one's up to about 48 hours. You give it a mission, and it goes down with a package of sensors, including bathymeter, multi-beam bathymeter, which gives very accurate topography or bathymetry, a side-scan sonar, which maps the texture and roughness and very surface hardness of the nodule field, a sub-bottom profiler, which is a sort of a low-energy seismic device, which can penetrate down to about 100 meters, so provides the structure underneath, and then importantly a camera. And you can see that picture on the right. That's a camera taken from the AUV, and that image I showed before was a mosaic taken from the AUV. And so you can demonstrate continuity between the box cores because you have the samples, and then we can fly the AUV the 7 kilometres between them. We can look at every photograph, and we can, without any doubt, show that the resource is completely continuous.
How do you just curiosity? Is there enough light underwater to use a camera?
No, the AUV has a strobe on it. So down at that depth, it's completely dark. Yeah. It's about 2 degrees Celsius, 100 bar pressure. It's a relatively difficult environment to operate in.
I saw the on the video showing that the AUV was at 1.2 or 1.1 meters above the seafloor, so it just skims the bottom. Yeah, amazing.
At that altitude, that was an ROV that took those images. So a similar device, but in that case tethered to the vehicle. So more user control. That one we can fly at about 1 meter height. The AUVs we sort of limit to about 3 meters height. Just because they're autonomous and they have to maintain their own obstacle avoidance.
Thank you, and really interesting about the chemistry similarity across the seafloor. I mean, you're really in the realm of Lyle and Hutton and the principle of uniformitarianism and kind of the seabed chemistry and all of that. Okay, so the resource is there. It's one nodule thick, but extremely extensive. So just for my education, the proposed mining method will be to go across with a kind of a hoover, which is tethered to the ship above. Is that correct? And then
that's correct. Yes.
And then that will be a continuous process loading up the ship. And I'm completely new to this. I mean, so stop me if I'm wrong. But will it be a batch process, or will you be able to continually offload off that ship?
It'll be a continuous process. And I guess, Gerard, if you go to about slide 10, I think that might be a useful place to start, just sort of around some of the technology and technology development. Actually, I think the sequence that you've got, it might be the one before that. Yeah, this one. So a lot of people say, okay, well, if the resource is there, how do you get it up? Which is the question that you asked. And one of the key things that in this space is that it's not new. This was actually first done way back in the 1970s. There were 4 consortia of major mining industrial steel companies that started exploring and then looking to develop the resource of the CCZ. There were a number of tests by Kennecott, the Kennecott consortia, and also one led by Lockheed Martin, that in the 70s resulted in them bringing about 1,500 tonnes of nodules to the surface, demonstrating that a remote vehicle using 1970s technology could roam the seafloor, collect the nodules and bring them to surface. And then those various groups as well also then process them into metals, largely cathodes. So the technology was demonstrated back in the 70s. We've subsequently had the advantage of 50 years of oil and gas offshore technology development, where a whole series of technologies have been improved. And indeed, some of the core technologies like position keeping and location and heave compensation were actually invented by these guys out in the 70s, which have subsequently been very much honed into completely commercial industrial technology. So pumps, umbilicals, control systems, all of the elements that we need to put a vehicle on the seafloor to pump the water and then bring it to the surface has been honed. And so with what we're doing at the moment, it's not so much any core technology development. It's all about assembling existing technologies to do this purpose.
And sorry, just a phrase used in there, heave compensation. Is that the motion of the boat on a varying current or wave, or is that something else? Yeah,
that's so. No, a vessel has a number of different movements. It has pitch, yaw, and heave, and you can control the sort of pitch, yaw, roll by putting stuff in the middle of the boat. But heave is where the boat actually goes up and down because of the swell. And so what that is, and it's done in various different ways, but basically a mechanism whereby whatever you're putting into the water has a controlled movement, so that it basically takes out the impact of the heave of the vessel. And it's done a number of ways. The system that we're using for deployment of the collector, that's using it in the launch and recovery system. There's a beam there will go up and down to remove the heave motion. In the moon pool, often it's done on large air-driven cylinders, which move the whole derrick up and down to make sure that the motion of the boat is removed when you put the material on the seafloor, and also when you put it through the splash zone.
And so essentially, it's like a kind of a shock absorber, really, on the boat.
Essentially,
that was. There we go. That's the picture.
Yeah. So this is the system that we've developed with our partners, Allseas. One of the advantages that we have in the current environment is, as we highlighted, there's been 50 years of technology development by an offshore oil and gas industry, which now is currently at a point in its development where it needs to pivot away from its core business, which doesn't have a great future to it, to other uses. And a lot of the contractors in this space who are used to working with the large oil majors and are themselves very large companies like Allseas, Transocean, Halliburton, are all looking for where are they going to deploy these billions of dollars of assets that they've developed, and the capability and balance sheets that they have now with very strong oil prices, which are good, but they need to pivot into other things. Offshore wind is one, and they're very interested in developing the technology to pivot into this space, which they see as a natural energy hedge, battery metals for the industries that they've come out of. So we entered into an agreement with Allseas some 3 years ago now, where they would develop a test collection system, and then on the success of that, enter into a contract mining contract with us. So that vessel that you saw, it's a converted Samsung 10,000 drill ship that they acquired at a good price, significantly less than the $700 million price tag it had on construction, something less than 50. They then built the collector vehicle, which you saw, that was the yellow box, a umbilical which connects that to the surface and provides the power, control systems and telemetry, and then a riser, which is basically a steel pipe with a jumper, which is a high-tech rubber hose that connects the vehicle to the riser and make sure that the motions of both are separated from one another. The collector drives along the seafloor. It uses water jets that are driven parallel to the seafloor, so not into the seafloor, but parallel to minimise the amount of sediment that's entrained. And then through a process called the Coanda process, which is works in a similar way to an aeroplane wing. You force a fluid to go over a curved surface, which then creates lift, and that lifts the nodules into an adductor on the head. That then you provide additional water and then pump it into the collector. Within the collector, there's a separator, so an area where there's a hopper that slows down the speed of the nodules. The entrained sediment is discharged behind the vehicle, and then the nodules pumped up to the riser. The riser then uses a system called airlift, so basically injecting air about 2 kilometres down into the pipe to decrease the density of the material in the pipe, and then essentially displacive forces from around force the nodules and the slurry to the surface. The nodules are separated from water just using simple screening on the vessel and then discharged into the hold, and the return water is discharged at a depth nominally a bit deeper than 1,200 metres depth.
Sorry, just I'm learning as you speak. You know, this is lots of information to take in. You talk about a slurry in the riser, but you also talk about sediment reduction. So is the slurry the nodules in the water, or is there a
There's no mud. So basically, it's just the sediment from the seafloor. We don't introduce any muds or any chemicals or any additives to the process.
But when you collect, you talked about this, the collector, then the selector. So you're reducing the amount of sediment. Do you have a kind of a mud weight? I know you said you're not introducing mud, but is there a kind of a preferred slurry density that you use to transport the nodules in?
No. The whole aim is to get entrain as little mud as possible, and then deposit the mud as rapidly as possible directly behind the machine. For engineering purposes and also for environmental purposes, we want to pick up the materials that we don't bring to surface. We want to put it down as quickly as we can behind the vehicle. We've done a lot of work looking at the dynamics of the discharge plumes, both at the seafloor and in the mid-water. And a lot of work that we've done with a group called DHI, or the Danish Hydraulics Institute, one of the leaders in modelling hydrodynamic processes and plumes for the dredge industry, shows that the plume on the subsea settles very rapidly. because while the individual sediment particles are very fine, they're 15 to 20 microns on average. Because they're in seawater and they're largely negatively charged clays, it flocculates very quickly, and we end up with flocks of the order of a millimetre in size within minutes to hours of it discharging out the back of the machine. So the settling velocities on those are hundreds of metres a day, and the average height that plume gets to is about 5 metres. So you can do the math in your head very quickly that settles out very rapidly in the tracks behind the collector.
Interesting. And it brings me down to kind of seawater chemistry and benthic behavior and stuff, but that's a different conversation we can talk about another time. So essentially it's an air displacement lift. So it's what's going up is primarily the nodules and seawater.
Nodules, water and air. So it's a three-phase.
Nodules, water and air. Okay, and let's say it's 3% nickel. Nickel's currently $23,000 a ton. So what are you talking about? Kind of $900 rock?
Yeah, thereabouts, 8 to 900, depending on how you do the numbers.
And that's a kind of a historic high. So one nodule thick. How many meters do you need for a ton?
How many meters do you need for a ton of production?
Or maybe you don't think about it like that. So let me ask you a question another way. How do you work out what your cost's going to be?
Okay, so I guess there's the production is based on traversing along at 0.5 meters per second. A production system crawler the one that we're testing at the moment is 6 meters wide, will be a 12 meter wide vehicle. From that, we're looking at production rates of the order of 3,000 ton a day, traversing the seafloor. Our costs are basically the capital on the vessel, fuel and people and spare parts when we're offshore, and then transport costs to bring it onshore, and then onshore it's the processing costs. About 30% of the costs are offshore costs, and sort of depending upon how they cut, 60% or thereabouts are processing costs, and about 10% transport.
Okay, and 3,000 tons per day, half a meter per second. That's quite quick.
Yeah, it's about the speed that a dozer goes when it's
up and
tracking.
running.
Yeah, if it's just walking a dozer along the track. So if you think about that, it's a fast walk. Yeah.
And the seabed topography is sufficiently flat for that to be achievable on a 6 meter wide beam.
Yeah. So the seafloor is very flat over wide areas. We're on a part of the ocean called the abyssal plains, and the Clarion Clipperton Zone in the east is at about 4,000 meters in depth, and 4,000 kilometers away in the west is at 5,000 meters. So you can see that average slope on that is very flat. There is some structure in there, some faulting and that sort of thing, but the faults are largely spaced about 10 kilometers apart. So you end up with areas that are very flat with the odd fault scarp with some volcanic exposures around those lifted grabens, but then very gentle slopes that we've done a lot of work on mapping out, and we've estimated from the bathymetry that we've done that 93% of the Nori D area has slopes less than 6 degrees, and that's what we've used to constrain our resource estimate.
Okay, and you've mapped them out so you can plan your routes accordingly in blocks, and when you've got to change it. So are you collecting 3,000 tons per day onto a single ship? And then what happens when you reach capacity of that ship?
So as we're collecting, there's a second vessel that will be sitting along behind, connected by floating hoses to the main vessel, which takes the nodules and gets them transferred. That vessel then goes off and takes it to port, where we can then transship them to wherever we need to take them. The vessel itself, the collector vessel, has storage on it, so it can keep collecting when you're connecting and disconnecting the transport vessels. So to provide for a continuous process.
Okay, there we go. There's the continuous process. So operating area, 1,200 or 1,100 nautical miles offshore west of Mexico. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And where's your process plant going to be? Did I read India, or is that?
Yeah, we've just signed an agreement with a group called Epsilon Carbon, which is a company related to the Jindal Steel group, which is one of the biggest steel manufacturers in India. They currently make anodes for batteries, and they're very keen in getting into the cathode business. We've spent many years with Hatch and a number of groups developing a processing flow sheet. And indeed, it rests very heavily on work that was done in the 1970s by Inco, who developed a pyrometallurgical, hydrometallurgical refining flow sheet to process nodules. And so we took all of that work, took it through sort of modern METSIM modelling, developed the flow sheet, which is relatively conventional, rotary kiln, electric arc furnace, very similar to a lot of the operations in Indonesia, with converting, which had been done before and is being increasingly looked at in Indonesia to produce a matte, and then very, very traditional matte refining using sulfuric acid leach to produce copper cathode, nickel and cobalt sulfate powders. So all of the unit operations that we're using have been done before on very similar materials. But nodules have an advantage over nickel laterites in that they have significantly higher grade, but also importantly, rather than producing a lot of slag, silicate slag, which the nickel laterite operators do, we produce a manganese silicate product. So out of once the kilns and the furnace, the furnace melts the material, it produces two phases. One phase is a silicate liquid, which represents about 93% of the mass flow of the system. And then also an iron alloy, which contains the nickel, copper, and cobalt in it. That iron alloy we then sulfidize in a converter by adding sulfur into the toyas in the base of the converter, and then basically blow oxygen in it to with a silicate slag to remove the iron, and we end up with a matte that goes about 40% nickel, about 40% copper, and a bit of cobalt in it. So a very, very high grade matte.
And so that matte then goes to a smelter.
That matte just then goes to a refinery. So that's where we would then base that process of dissolving it in a sulfuric acid leach, and then basically stepwise purification and removal of copper, then nickel, and then cobalt to produce the copper cathode, nickel and cobalt sulfates, and then also, interestingly, finally, an ammonium sulfate fertilizer grade material, so that there's no solid waste from anywhere in the process. The manganese silicate, which grades 42% manganese, is semi-reduced. So because of the processing that we've done, the manganese is as a manganese silicate, a synthetic olivine, which basically has Mn as a 2+ valent state. That material competes with manganese ores to make silico-manganese alloys, and has a very attractive manganese to iron ratio, and also a very attractive manganese to phosphorus ratio, and has somewhere between 7 and 17% value in use bonus for our customer over using a standard blend of manganese ores that are in the marketplace at the moment. So we see that that's going to be a premium product to go into producing manganese alloys, and it indeed will help alleviate some of the carbon emissions of that industry, which are very, very high. We've been working with a group called Sintef in Norway to do that test work on the manganese silicates that we we generated from a pilot test work. So this last in 2020, just before COVID hit, we collected a 70-ton bulk sample from the Clarion Clipperton Zone, and we completed a series of pilot tests in using FLS in Pennsylvania in the US to do the calcining, and then XPS in Sudbury to do the smelting and converting test work for us. And we demonstrated that we could produce the mat on spec pretty much as expected, and similarly the manganese silicate material. And Syntef have been working on those samples of the manganese silicate to prove that it's a very interesting product or interesting feedstock for the manganese industry, and then look at what value and use it is to our customers to use that material.
Thank you. That's a whole lot of information, a massive data dump to my poor brain. But I'm so are you assuming that the mat or that the rotary kiln and all the converting process is likely going to take place in India?
We have an agreement with Epsilon Carbon where they will develop for what we call Project Zero, which is our initial small scale commencement project of 1.3 million tonnes per annum of wet nodules. They'll build a plant capable of processing that material, and indeed we're going through the various study phases with them now. We provided them all of our flow sheet development work and access to all of the information. They're putting the studies together now and identifying the sites. They've found a site, and we're reviewing that to basically build that plant to have it ready for late 2024 when we're targeting production.
And am I right in thinking that's is that the plant that's going to cost $110 million? Is that I've seen some figures that you had the cost of that being reduced from 163 million down to 110. Is that the bit that you're talking about?
No, that's for the offshore system. So we have
that's the offshore system. So sorry.
So we have an agreement with Allseas where they'll develop the vessels and systems for Project Zero. So once we've finished the collector test, that vessel, the hidden gem, is what we'll use to commence production with. So the lion's share of the material that we need, or the offshore kit that we need to get going with, already exists. So we're in a very different situation to many sort of projects that when you do a test, you do the test work, you throw all the equipment away that you did the test work, and then you build the real stuff. Here, by virtue of being able to use existing assets, we can retool the hidden gem. And what we need to do is we need to rebuild the collector to make it bigger. We do need to replace the riser because it needs to be a larger pipe to accommodate the larger production. But then a lot of the other systems that we have on the vessel already, we just need to upgrade. And so the estimate to do that work is 110 million US. And the agreement we have with Allseas is that we need to provide half of that capital up front, and then they will essentially bankroll half of it, and we recover that from the production when we get going. And
your presentation shows that you've got $69 million in cash. Is the plan to allocate 55 of that to the retooling and the kind of the re-equipping of the hidden gem, so that you can then start production? Or are you?
Yeah, so we when we raised a bit less money than we anticipated, we went back to our partners and said, look, we'd like you to share some of the get started cost. And so we reached an agreement with Allseas where they would pay for half of the conversion costs, the capital, and we would pay the other half, and we would then repay them the half that they had paid through a production levy. On that point, going forward, we anticipate that there will be asset owners who will make available their production assets, and they will cover all of those costs. That's our hope in the future, and it's certainly consistent with conversations that we're having. But this is the first one, so it's only reasonable that we bear a larger portion of that risk. On the onshore side, we always knew there would be parties who wanted to get into this industry, and by either converting some of those assets, like Tony referred to earlier, or in this case, finding a company who wants to be in the battery cathode space. And of course, we know that India has a desperate need for all of these materials just to support their local economy. And so, we haven't announced the final terms of the Indian economics yet, but we will do by the end of the year, we hope. But the option there is that we found a partner who can fund all of that capex, and so that was really just a way of showing the market that, hey, we can keep this very capital light because there is sufficient operating margin to be able to share it with those capital providers.
Thank you. You've talked about getting into production in late 2024. What are the critical path items in doing that? Is there more proving of pilot scale test work? I mean, I saw that you're doing the riser deployment test in April and May. Where are you in your kind of understanding of economic thresholds and technological or technical thresholds that will give you confidence on the production, or is it just a case of ramping up?
So as we said, the technology development started in the 70s. We then improved on that. We've then subsequently done a whole series of component tests on the offshore system. So the collector was finalised construction in January, February this year. Then a series of wet tests initially in the harbour in Rotterdam, then in the North Sea, and then at depth. So, and doing all of the operations that we need to operate the collector system at the speed at which it'll go, turning, connecting the jumper, and there are some operations subsea that are a bit challenging, and they demonstrated they could do them all. The hidden gem now is heading towards the site. It'll mobilise in a port on the west coast of the Americas, and then head out to site with a view to start what we're calling the collector test in mid-August this year. From that, it'll do a direct trial of driving the vehicle on the seafloor, connecting nodules, bringing them to the surface, doing all of the unit operations offshore, apart from vessel-to-vessel transfer, because that was seen to not be a critical element at this stage. So that test has two purposes: one, to demonstrate the technical and economic capability of the system, but also to provide us an opportunity to observe the environmental impacts of that work. There's a second vessel that will be heading out before, during, and after the collector test, so it'll do pre-test survey. So survey exactly where we're going to in a lot of detail, collect the third part of our environmental baseline work, which we've been undertaking now for quite a number of years. So for each understanding the spatial and temporal variation of the environmental baseline there, we'll then undertake the collection, and during the collection monitor the impacts of the plume and the other impacts to the environment. And then at the end of the collector test, once the vehicle is removed and the hidden gem headed back to port, it'll undertake a series of surveys looking at where the sediment plume went, looking at what impact it had on the biology of the areas that it drove over, and sort of how many nodules were left behind, what our recoveries were, and what the depth of penetration of the vehicle into the seafloor. So a very thorough study which will give us a good understanding of the capability of the system and what the impact it has on the environment.
Thank you. That's really comprehensive and very clear. When will the reports be out for that? When will you have the kind of the big reveal of what the environmental impact is going to be?
So we have a plan to lodge a application for a production permit or production contract with the International Seabed Authority in the second half of next year. So that will involve putting together what they call a mining production plan. So basically the mine plan, the equipment, a financing plan, which the two of those documents together are essentially a pre-feasibility study, which we'll lodge with the ISA, and an environmental impact statement, as well as an environmental monitoring and management plan for the operation going forward. So that all of that work will be pulled together into those key documents and lodged with the ISA as part of our application in the end of 2023.
Thank you very much. That's the kind of the Gerard, is that the kind of the big target that you're working towards?
It is, Merlin. Yeah, it's a super exciting, 15 months ahead of us, because we know a lot about the environment, of course, in which we've been operating. We know that the consortia back in the 70s and 80s produced an enormous amount of data. NOAA, the US agency, of course, have carried out a full environmental impact study, which they reported to the Senate in the early 90s. And we, of course, have done a lot of our own study, and other contractors, including the Belgians and their subsidiary GSR, carried out their pilot collector last year. And so we've benefited by being able to review this material and observe it. And so, look, we're super excited because we've always believed that this resource offers real benefits from a environment and societal perspective. And so obviously getting more tangible conclusions is going to really help us with this important messaging. So yeah, obviously the collector test is important. We're fortunate to have an amazingly talented partner in Allseas. They've been operating, in difficult environments in the deep ocean for 35 years. And, we've assembled some years ago a world-class leading science team from many different organizations, including the Natural History Museum and National Oceanography Center and University of Hawaii. And of course, we have lots of external expertise coming together to help us on this monitoring campaign. So it's a very busy time, but it's a super exciting time as well. And look forward to reporting it all.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's been fascinating for me, 50 minutes learning about the company and the projects. Anthony, I really appreciate the technical insights you provided, and Gerard, the oversight and just the whole thing. Thank you very much. I look forward to the news flow as you go ahead, with eyes on that kind of 18-month horizon. I think that's the crucial element.
Absolutely. Thanks, Miller.
Thanks, Merlin.
Bye.
Bye.